No better conversation to have than with Jerry Howard. You know him as the CEO of the National Association of Home Builders. And, sir, I'm wondering sort of your key takeaway from this report, how you're reading it.
Well, the only way we can read it is that it looks like we're heading into a housing recession. And if that is indeed the case, it doesn't bode well for the economy as a whole. There's still some hope that things can turn around, but we're getting more and more pessimistic.
Home builders getting more pessimistic, yet still the affordability question there, the need for more supply. When we look at the housing starts data that we're going to get a little bit later in the week, are people still going to want to be breaking ground, Jerry?
No, I think people are going to start to hold off. In fact, when I travel the country and talk to builders, a lot of them are starting to get very, very cautious about whether they're going to break down. That's particularly true in the spec market, but it's also true in the market where they are negotiating with customers for sales right now, because at the same time as we're seeing inflation on the mortgage rates and interest, we're also seeing increases in construction costs that are really throwing the market off. What I'm really worried about is, historically, housing has led us into every recession since World War II, but it's also led us out of every recession since World War II. Right now, with the supply shortage we have, with the fact that we're getting hit at both ends of the pipeline, cost of construction and then cost of loans, I don't know that we'd be able to lead us out of a recession. I think that this is a potentially dangerous situation.
I'm wondering if you can draw out a little bit more some of the supply side issues here, Jerry. If confidence is hitting a new multi-year low, then what does this mean in terms of the broader issues that you can see among builders and all the people who are in the supply side?
Well, you're going to see builders do what they do in terms of a recessionary climate. They'll retrench a little bit. Some of them will start taking on contracts for larger remodeling and renovation projects. You'll see them, as I mentioned, stop doing any spec housing. And on the supply side, hopefully, this situation will drive policymakers to the conclusion that we need to have a long-term lumber agreement with Canada, that we need to get the supply chain fixed, and that we need to get rid of some of the regulations, particularly at the state and local level, but also the federal level, that are increasing the cost of housing. And then lastly, we need to look at our labor supplies over the long term. There are still hundreds of thousands of jobs out there in the construction sector that haven't been filled.
So how do you square that? If you have a number of jobs that are open that haven't been filled, and yet you're starting to see a slowdown, is sort of this quote, if we get there, housing recession, due to a supply issue, or are there more concerns about a demand issue?
Well, the more interest rates go up, the more it becomes a demand issue. It's sort of a catch-22, if you will. The demand had been very, very strong. We never fully stopped seeing demand as we came out of the Great Recession. So demand was out there, household formation is strong, but if people can't afford to buy, particularly the first-time home buyer, can't get into the market, that has an impact across the board.
Jerry, how much duress are home builders under to lower their prices? How much are they worrying about, well, the people who have signed contracts but haven't yet got their houses, and what the knock-on effects are there?
Well, a lot of those contracts had escalator clauses in them, believe it or not, that the builder would expect if he had to pay more for some of the materials that the customer would pick up the price at the back end, or they would cancel the contract. I'm starting to hear more and more now about cancellation of contracts in the last month and a half than I have ever before.
To the extent that prices can start falling in the housing market, then how do they fall? How fast do they fall? And do they fall fast enough to avert any potential future issues?
Well, that's an interesting question, because we haven't had this situation before where we're going into a recession, but we still have major supply shortages. And I guess it's going to depend upon how recessionary the rest of the economy gets as to how this will all balance out in the end. Right now, I think that if this recession is, as our economists are saying, relatively shallow, and we come out of it by the middle or the end of next year, I think we'll be okay. But if it gets any more dire, that's when I think we're going to have a longer term and a deeper problem.
What is the historical lead time? If housing is the leading indicator, what signals are you next looking for?
I think the next signal that we have to look for is the labor markets and unemployment. In fact, right now, in a conversation I had today with some economists, that is the only signal that's outstanding that would keep us from saying we're definitely heading into a recession.